A little bit about Mrs. Sunalini Menon. She is a food technologist and has spent more than 50 years in coffee in the arena of quality. She has worked as Director, Quality at the Coffee Board of India, as a quality evaluator, trainer, professor, coffee blender, developer of green coffee brands, judge in coffee competitions, writer of coffee articles, and even as a coffee guide to new coffee entrepreneurs. She's heading the Sensory Lab for Coffee, Coffee Lab, which she helped to set up in 1996 in Bengaluru, India. She lectures and teaches at the University del Caffè de Trieste under the Ernesto Alai Foundation and the University of Trieste, Italy. She is on the Board of Trustees of the Coffee Quality Institute USA, an independent director on the board of Tata Coffee, which is Asia's largest integrated coffee company and one of the foremost producers of specialty coffee in India, and the president of the Women's Coffee Alliance India, which is affiliated to the International Women's Coffee Alliance USA. A warm welcome to you, ma'am. So I would like to call upon the second eminent panelist today, Mrs. Hamsini Appadurai, Director Marketing, Sangameshwar Coffee Estates Limited. A brief on ma'am, Hamsini Appadurai, Director Marketing at Sangameshwar Coffee Estates Limited and Treasurer of WCI holds a Bachelor in Corporate Management and PGDM in Business and Finance. The farm spread over 900 hectares nurture Arabica and Robusta, belonging to a family of legal and financial faculty. Hamsini Appadurai, equipped with a Q processing professional in Arabica and Robusta, has come a long way to being passionately involved in coffee to implement sustainable farming practices to minimize environmental impact and enhance coffee quality. Welcome, ma'am. So I'd like to welcome the third eminent speaker today, Mr. Sunil Pinto, Assistant Instructor for CQIs. Welcome, sir. So Mr. Sunil Pinto, born into a coffee family, has been a coffee professional for nearly 2 decades. After completing a postgraduate diploma in coffee quality management from Coffee Board of India, he started on the retail side of the industry as a barista trainer for a coffee chain and worked his way through the coffee supply chain back to the farm. Along the way, he has managed the quality department of a roasting facility and the green bean quality department at a dry mill. And he is currently an assistant instructor for CQI's quality evaluation programs, and he is also a member of Farmer Producer Organization, where he set up the quality evaluation system that provides feedback to farmers and finds homes for the collectives produce. Being a CQI certified post-harvest process professional, he is working on educating producers to unlock the flavors potential of their coffee. Thank you and welcome, sir. So let's start today's session. I think we will pass on the baton to one of our
Okay, good morning and welcome to this workshop on the mysterious Robusta bean. I use the word mysterious because I think it has got so many positives in it that, we have never understood the bean. So the bean is mysterious, and I'm hoping that at the end of this session, we will be able to unlock some of those mysteries that are there in the bean. I just wanted to tell you that this workshop has 2 parts to it. The first part is where we will be presenting to you, and the second part is the actual sensory assessment of the various coffees that we shall speak to you about subsequently. Now, the presentation comprises 3 parts. First is the cultivation aspects, which will be presented by Hamsini. The second is processing, which will be presented by Sunil Pinto. And finally, I will be talking to you about the flavors and the uses of the Robusta bean. If there are any questions, I suggest that we have these questions when we are tasting the coffees, because then you will be able to relate what you have heard in the presentations. And when you're sipping these coffees, I think you probably, you will be able to ask the question perhaps in the right perspective. So having said that, I request Hamsini to make the first inroad into the cultivation of the Robusta bean. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to India, the land of magic, mystery, and coffee. We invite you to sit back, relax, and take a journey with us into the world of our Robusta. The Robusta originated in the humid lowland forest in the sub-Saharan region of Africa, an area with wide natural geographic distribution from Guinea to Uganda and Angola. In the wild, it is found mainly in the humid evergreen forest with elevations ranging from sea level to 1,500 meters above sea level. Cultivation of the species began in around 1870 in Congo. The plant was initially recognized and documented by explorers and botanists during the 19th century. The species was officially classified in mid-1800 by the French botanist Pierre-Antoine Duhem, and it was given the name Coffea canephora. In the late 19th century, the Robusta traveled from Congo to Belgium to Java to Sri Lanka to finally arrive into India. 5 countries account for 90% of world Robusta production. Vietnam leads the world production, followed by Brazil, Indonesia, and Uganda. India, in the 5th place, grows Robusta under shade in altitudes ranging from 500 to 1,400 meters above sea level. There is a possibility to find high-altitude Robusta in India. Vietnam and Brazil are the foremost exporters of Robusta. Brazil retails a substantial portion of its production for internal consumption. Indian Robusta is crucial for espresso, and our major importers are Italy and Germany, amongst others. India, according to Coffee Board estimates, our Arabica production is about 30% of our production, and Robusta is 70%. 83% of our production is exported, it's Robusta. India accounts for almost 5.3% of world coffee trade. In India, coffee is produced in traditional and non-traditional areas. In the traditional areas, Karnataka is foremost, growing Robusta in Chikmagalur, Coorg and Hassan. Kerala goes Robusta in Wayanad and Travancore. And in Tamil Nadu, Robusta is predominantly in the Nilgiris. In the non-traditional areas of Andhra Pradesh and Odisha, it's predominantly Arabica. The name Robusta comes from its resilient and hard nature. And as mentioned, it's scientifically identified as Coffea canephora. It's able to grow in lower altitudes and diverse climates. Selected seeds are germinated in February to March and in 45 days attain button stage. The seedlings are nurtured and in a nursery for 6 months. The seeds are then transplanted in the month of August or September. Plants are planted with a spacing of 10 by 10 or 8 by 8 depending on the varietal. Closer planting is coming into India. We are conservative and protect our forests. Indian coffee is forest grown. Indian Robusta is shade grown, and this makes our Robusta very unique. They are planted under shade trees which attribute to the unique flavor of our coffees. Trees like the silver oak, wild fig, red cedar, rosewood, and tropical fruits provide shade with adequate spacing. The shade trees also contribute to carbon sequestration and help us grow climate change-ready coffees. Robusta plants require filtered sunlight, 40 to 50% for unirrigated plantations, and 30 to 40% for irrigated blocks to maintain consistent production. An average plant will yield its maiden crop by the 6th or 7th year and take 10 to 12 years to give economic returns. Robusta is a top-rooted plant and hence requires continuous feeds of water. Robusta is cross-pollinated and flowering usually happens all together. Irrigation is widely practiced in India for Robusta in March, 40 days after the previous harvest and pruning. The stress between harvest and irrigation induces more spikes. Blossom irrigation is generally by overhead or sprinkler irrigation. Sprinkler irrigation is the most versatile method of irrigation to supplement the natural rainfall for the growth and flowering of coffee. Robusta plants, being susceptible to drought, respond very well to irrigation. Irrigation also enhances vegetative woods and keeps the plant supplied with water. It increases the microbial content for absorption and keeps the plant sustained within a microclimate. Irrigation increases the possibility of uniform berry size and ripening. After irrigation, by the 8th or 9th day, blossom opens. The plantations are buzzing and the aroma is heavenly. The entire farm is covered in white. The blossom needs to be supported with backup showers or irrigation after maybe 20 days. The post-blossom irrigation can be drip or overhead. The drip or trickle method has assumed considerable importance in recent years in the view of the greater need of economy in usage of water. Water is distributed by a network of tubing which brings water directly to the root of each plant. Cross-pollination with the help of bees takes place within 6 hours of blossom. An average of 10 to 12 nodes per branch and 25 to 30 branches per mature plant is optimal. Southwest monsoon commences in India from June, continuing till October. The plants rest, rejuvenate, and prepare to mature and ripen. Water plays a critical role in the biochemical and physiological activities of the coffee bush. All life inside the coffee is linked to the cycle of water. The major coffee growing belts in India are situated in South India, and coffee plants invariably rely on the southwest monsoon. More than 75% of the total rainfall is received in these months. Then, the northeast monsoon takes over, resulting in a few sporadic showers in the months of October and November. The increased moisture and nutrient availability during the monsoon support lush vegetative growth. The plants develop new leaves, branches, and shoots. An average of about 50 to 70 inches of rainfall is received in these 4 months. There are regions which experience rainfall going up to 150 inches also. Our slopes help us to maintain a well-drained soil. Trenching and pitting also helps so that the extra water seeps into the ground. Ripening is slow and takes almost 10 months from blossom to bean. Water is critical. 30 months after monsoon, winter irrigation also helps. The seed hardening and maturation take place during monsoon. The bean development of the Robusta passes through various stages. The transition between stages is continuous. The pellet stage starts from flowering up to the 6th week. Rapid expansion goes on from the 7th week to the 16th week. Endosperm formation or a suspended growth happens from 16 to 18 weeks. The seed hardening happens from 18 to 28 weeks and maturation is from 28 to 36 weeks. Indian climate conditions support the growth of the plant at every stage. The cherries swell and start to change color from green to red, and every coffee farmer has a big smile on his face. We have 3 major varietals growing abundantly in India. Our old Robusta, or Peradeniya, came into India from Sri Lanka and hence the name Peradeniya. It grows to a height of about 10 feet. Plants are planted with a spacing of 10 by 10 feet. They are hardy, big plants, and the average yield is about 1,500 kgs per hectare. We have the selection 1R, in which these are seeding progenesis of 2 individual high-yielding mother plants. They are high-yielding plants, leaves are broad, fruits are medium, bold, round to oblong, and in tight clusters of 40 to 50 fruits. The average yield is about 2,000 kgs per hectare to 2,500 kgs per hectare. The C/R is a hybrid of Robusta and Coffea congenesis. It's developed to interspecific hybridization and is very unique to India. Each branch has 9 to 12 nodes. It's closer planting and compact bushes. The percentage of bolder beans is higher. It's a uniform ripener and easier to harvest. The average yield under irrigated circumstances is about 2,500 kgs per hectare to 3,000 kgs per hectare. India's push for higher yields lies in its quest for identifying annual high-yielding healthy plants for clonal multiplication. This commendable work is done by our scientists at the Indian Coffee Board, where plants have been identified and tissue culture has been taken up, promising a bright future for great quality and good yield Robusta from India. There are many reasons why the Indian Robusta is favored. It's more productive, number of flowers per node is higher, number of nodes per branch is higher, and number of branches per plant is higher. The plant is sometimes grown to 8 feet and in 2 tiers. It grows in both subtropical and tropical climates and is resistant to climate change. It's a hardy and resistant plant to changing weather patterns. Can grow in rising temperatures and a range of elevations. It's possible to grow the Robusta more economically than the Arabica. Even ripener lowers cost of harvest and in turn brings down cost of production. It's easier to maintain and the undergrowth is minimal. It's tolerant to major diseases and pests of coffee like the coffee rust and white stem borer. It contains more antioxidants and chlorogenic acids. The Robusta plant deserves recognitions for its resilience, adaptability, and significant contribution to the global coffee industry. Bring a smile to your face with an Indian Robusta in your cup. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hamsini. We now move on to the next step, which is the processing, which is a very important aspect for Robusta beans. Because remember, it has mucilage, which is very thick, very difficult to extricate. So I think processing is one of the steps whereby, when you remove it very carefully, you have a great cup of coffee. If you're going to, neglect that aspect, well, you're going to have a coffee which has got all the off notes of fermented, phenolic, medicinal, etc. So, Sunil, the floor is yours. I think you could.
Okay. So now that Hamsini has given us some information about how Robusta is grown, we are going to delve a little bit into what happens next and what the journey looks like from this fruit to the final seed that for farmers is the income. Traditionally, processing has been more just about making that product saleable. So we should be able to store this coffee and we should be able to sell it, which means we want to pick a fresh fruit and then we want to do something about being able to store it. And that is mainly how can we dry it. So you can dry it as a whole fruit, or you can peel off the layers that didn't really interest you because you want the seed inside. And this kind of led to what we call processing methods. So if you just dried it in the fruit, it was called cherry or natural coffee. If you pulled off the skin and you washed it because you wanted to remove the mucilage, and then you dried it, it was washed or parchment coffee. But the primary purpose here was to reach the seed and to dry it and to sell the seed. We have changed that perspective. We've come a long way. And what has happened is today we start looking at how can we do something more with that seed. So it's not just about getting to the seed, but it's about what we can develop along the way and how we can differentiate that seed from other seeds. So this is a little information about what is inside the Robusta seed. Primarily, it has a very thick, leathery skin outside. Okay, it has a sticky, slightly more pectinous or harder mucilage to break. The sugars in this mucilage are on the lower side. The cell structure is very tight and the beans are a little harder. And so movement of anything between these cells within the bean is more difficult. Okay, from the chemical composition, the highlights are that Robusta tends to have more caffeine. It has a higher chlorogenic acid content. It has less sugar. So at the bottom, some of the important compounds which actually lead to, I would say, a characteristic taste of Robustas. Spicy and earthy are the two notes that pop up. So when we want, or now we know what this bean has within it. So if you look at the Indian scenario mostly, we've had many farms here that actually cultivate both Arabica and Robusta on the same farm. Okay, this is a little unique to us. In many other parts of the world, they grow only one species of coffee. Okay, so that has brought about a generalization that you process them the same way. They're both coffee. And you tend to apply similar processing methods to both these varieties because they grow together. And like I said, our aim was to get to the seed. Okay? So when people started talking about different ways of processing, I think there was more confusion in India than anything else because we again did this. We looked at them the same way and we applied our knowledge kind of equally to both. And this has kind of led to some doing really well and some actually not doing so great. And we wonder why, because we didn't actually look at it that Arabica and Robusta could be different from each other. Okay? Many people focus on processing again with that base idea of getting to the seed. And so what kind of tends to happen is we lose kind of waypoints or intricacies along the way. We don't somehow have a clear idea of what we want to achieve. We know we all want to get there. And so we end up going back to what we are comfortable with or what we know better. So many times farmers sort of carry on doing the processes that they do, and they hope that the market will want what they already do. So even when they try to be different, they only are different to the point within that comfort zone. They don't want to go out because they don't know what to do, or they feel it a big risk that if you go outside the norm, what do you do with that coffee if nobody accepts it? And this is a problem that I resonate with a lot. Especially in coffee evaluation, we find this question coming up a lot. Okay, so let's just look at what these processing methods traditionally look like, and then what they could look like. Okay, so traditionally, we harvested the fruit. We did some sort of separation, and first, our aim was to peel off the skin. Like I said, two things. One is, if you peel off the skin, the coffee dries much faster. The other thing is, you are able to dry bigger volumes of this seed on smaller drying areas. And so that was the primary thing, right? Becoming efficient. Some people did some sort of fermentation because they found that it sometimes is a little easier. It saves energy and time because if you break down that mucilage, it kind of leaves the bean and you are able to, again, more easily dry the bean. But traditionally, most people just did a direct wash. Our equipment or our machinery was, again, just one setup for the whole farm. And whatever coffee we grew on the farm, we just pushed it through the same process. And so what happened was, when you direct wash a Robusta, it is a lot more violent because that mucilage is so sticky and it's so hard to remove that you tend to bruise and damage the beans. Okay, so this is something that kind of leads to the problems that we face a little later on. But once we got it and we removed the mucilage, our focus was, how can we just dry this, bag it, and be ready to sell it? Okay, and this, at the bottom, you will see a process that almost contains the same steps, but we've added some stuff to it. Okay, so the primary difference between these two is that on the second side, we actually look at what we want to achieve and how we go about doing that using how much of the traditional knowledge we already have. Okay, so one thing was, like I said, as soon as you harvest it, the first thing you want to do is start washing it. Or if it's a natural, start drying it. And there has been a significant break in this idea. So we have realized that this part or this time between harvesting the fruit and actually starting one of those processes, it could be drying or washing, or rather pulping, we have an opportunity to develop some stuff here. And so the first step in this is in-fruit fermentation. So it may or may not happen in a wash process, but it is a good idea. Okay, we then remove the skin, and we again look whether there could be another fermentation step. Okay, so it could be this and that, or it could be only one, but the idea is you create complexity, you create differences. And these differences are what bring about the variety and the uniqueness of, let's say, your specific coffee or your specific farm. You then wash, and if you notice, drying is not the same. Again, we focus on being able to dry the right way or in a more refined manner. Okay? And we'll get into these differences a little later. I will just take you through the other processes that we have. Okay? So, honey was a big trend. So, again, what happened here was that traditionally places with less water who also wanted to go away from a natural coffee started this process of peeling the fruit and drying it along with the mucilage. Okay, this is a very risky process because you expose the mucilage and then you have to deal with it, but you don't have the water or you don't have the resource to actually wash it off. And so again, the focus was, how can we just dry this and make sure it doesn't create a mess? And that was the traditional honey process. Our focus was removing the fruit skin and then fermenting it a little bit, or maybe not at all, and then getting into the drying phase as quickly and as cleanly as possible. Okay? If you look at how that has evolved, if you actually do an in-fruit fermentation, you start breaking down this mucilage and you start creating some changes in the mucilage, and therefore, by the time you peel off the skin, you are actually able to deal with it a little better than if you just pulled it off. So this also leads to changes which are not there in the traditional process. Again, you can ferment after pulling the skin off, and then you can finally again look at drying it in a manner that helps the goal that you want to achieve. So what happens in the second process is that your focus is about what you want to achieve more than just finishing drying. So in the traditional processes, we just focus, like I said, on getting a saleable product. And here we delve a little bit more into how we can refine that and how we can actually differentiate it. And I've just put a couple of steps here. I just say that you could do an in-fruit fermentation and then you can dry it, but it's actually not so simple. Okay? So we are going to look at some of this complication when we taste the coffees, and we are going to see what changes these processes could actually bring about. So looking at how the traditional method is done, and then looking out of what steps and what complications we could induce in the process to create products that are different. Okay? So this was a stage that is now common to everything else. And again, here the focus has just been this basic, where you spread it thin, you get rid of as much moisture as possible, and then based on how much drying yard space you have, you then manage those lots to get them off the yard as quickly as you can. Okay? But this has evolved into being very specific based on the goals that you want to achieve. So what is different about Robusta is mostly that when you do it, it leads to results that you didn't think of earlier. And it is a little different to handle from your normal process, because that normal process was actually not really different from just the process that you always followed. And so being able to look at these differences and relate them to the basic characteristics of the bean is a big part of where each farm is able to do it differently, where each farm is being able to differentiate not just from other farms, but within their own farm. And so all those other intricacies that Hamsini spoke about are something that yields many more unique lots. So this is, like I said, just a base of what can be done with processing, and we will look at what this achieves in our next segment. So I will hand this over now to Mrs. Menon.
Thank you very much, Sunil. Thank you, and I'll probably conclude this. So this is about the flavors and usage of the Robusta bean. You know, this morning I came across an adage sign which said, you need no title to be a leader. And I think the Robusta bean really embodies this particular statement. Now, when you look at the Robusta bean, it has withstood the test of time. It has been a bean which is often considered a poor cousin of the Arabica, a poor quality bean. But in my opinion, I think this is a bean which has got some excellent intrinsic value. And today, we have been able to recognize this intrinsic value. We've been able to prepare some really good coffees, if not fine Robusta coffees. And you know, all of us agree on this, that it can withstand the attack of pests and diseases. And I would also say that it can serve you some excellent cups of coffee, provided you give it the due care and respect that it richly deserves. Now, I'm going to talk about the 5 factors which affect the flavors of the Robusta bean. But the 5 factors are, first of all, the varietal. The second factor is the altitude, the soil conditions, and the cultivation practices. The third is processing. Fourth is roasting. And finally, how you brew the coffee. Now, when you look at the genetics, now if you look at Robusta, it's got such a positive point. You know, it occurs in many forms and subforms, unlike the Arabica. So there's diversity of forms. So when you have diversity of forms, I'm sure you'll have diversity of flavors too. But this is something where, you know, we really need to work on. I think research has understood this. Now there's a lot of, you know, work being done by the World Coffee Research. Many scientists in different parts of the world, even including Brazil, even including Vietnam, including India, we are working on these different forms which have different flavors. So again, you're going to have some really great flavors in the near future. Now, when you look at the varietals in India, I think Hamsini has also already told us that we have 3 varietals, the Peradeniya, the Selection 274, and the C/R. I'm going to concentrate on the flavor profile of each of these varietals. Now, when you look at the Peradeniya, it's come in from Sri Lanka. It's an erecta form of Robusta. The other varietals, of course, the 724, the 274 comes in from the Peradeniya, so it is also an erecta form of Robusta. But the Peradeniya has a very nice rounded mouthfeel. You know, when you put it in the mouth, your first impression is, it's nice and strong. But when you look further into the cup, you have chocolate, you have caramel, you have some nuts of almonds and walnuts. Go back and check this out. And if you look at the bitterness, yes, it has some bitterness. It's some flashes of brightness or acidity. And it's just got a fleck of sweetness. But you know, I can enhance all this through processing. I can enhance the brightness or the acidity. I hate to use the word acidity because immediately everyone says, oh, I'm going to have, you know, some gastric ulcers. It's not that acidity. It's the brightness of the cup, how you like it. I'm sure when you take a cup of orange juice, you have some nice brightness, right? That is brightness or acidity. Coming to the Selection 274, it's an offspring of the Peradeniya. But again, an improved variety. Look at the mouthfeel. It's good. It's soft. It's smooth. It's rounded, wholesome. And look at the flavors. It just doesn't have, you know, chocolate, caramel, and toasted nuts. It has a layered with soft fruit tones of soft cherry fruit. It has a lot of malt. It's got brightness, which is much more than what you see in the Peradeniya, again highlighted through the processing technique. And it has a lining of bitterness and more of sweetness. Now, the piece de resistance of all our varietals in India is the congenesis into Robusta, which I like to hereafter call it as Congusta, which I heard yesterday from Dr. Christoph. I think that's a nicer word to use and looks more exotic, sounds more exotic. Probably a buyer will pay a little more for the Congusta. So when you look at the Congusta, the beans are very bold. And you look at the flavor profile in the cup, you'll have a very soft, buttery, creamy mouthfeel. And you look at the flavors, range of flavors, soft cherry fruit. You have oranges, you have lemon, imagine in a Robusta cup. And of course, you have the chocolate and the caramel. Look at the brightness. It literally encompasses these flavors. Look at the finish. It's got lots of bright sweetness. You can even drink it as a standalone. So this is about the varietals. I come to the altitude, soil conditions, and cultural practices. I think Hamsini's already dealt with it, but I just want to highlight it from the angle of flavors. Now, if you look at the setting of the fruit, it's a cross-pollinated bean. So this is what I saw in Brazil, which I really sort of found it very, very attractive. And I think it's going to be a great way to grow your Robustas. Yesterday, we heard Professor talking about, having the shade trees, which are flowering trees. You have flowering trees, your Robusta is going to be benefited by it. You're going to have better setting of the fruit. And I saw in Brazil, every 4th row, they had a flowering plant, which is an eternal flowering. And I saw it buzzing with bees when the flowering took place. So I was asking them, why are you having the flowering? And they said, that is to bring about cross-pollination, to ensure the yield, and it can also bring about certain flavor profiles in the cup. So that is an interesting point to note. When I look at the altitude, as I said, Robusta grows in low altitude, grows at high altitude too. But we notice that when the altitude is about 900 meters, the bean is extremely hard. But then it has got clear flavors, brightness, and sweetness. Go to 1,100 meters, it's even more interesting. It's a low content of potassium. You have fruit acids, you have organic sugars, and all the flavors of the varietal getting highlighted. Remember, the higher you go up the mountain to grow your coffee, you're going to have intensity of flavors and clarity of flavors. The type of shade trees, interesting. This is something, again, I've been talking about yesterday. The type of shade trees seem to have an effect on the cup quality. We carried out an experiment. In fact, by chance, I came across this experiment. I walked into a farm in Kurg, and I got a different smell in the field. So I asked this farm, I looked all around. I said, how is it different smell here? Looked up, and I found the entire coffee plants were growing with the shade of sapotilla, or sapota, as we call it in India. And the next field, there was no sapota trees. It had a different smell. I looked at the plants, same varietal, same age, same source and of the material. The soil conditions were the same. So I decided to embark on this experiment. And every year, I started tasting these, harvested on the same day and same processing methodology, naturals, and it came to my lab, and we started analyzing. We found it that the ones on the sapotilla trees had the nuances of the sapota fruit. I thought I was imagining, but then every year I did it, and I tasted it blind. I asked the farmer to send it blind to me, and today I can say with conviction, yes. But then I need to back it up with scientific data. I just can't come to a forum and talk about it. But there are people, in fact, in Guatemala, there's friends of mine who are working on this aspect. Now, coming to the processing, I think Sunil has already explained. Processing is like processing in wine. I don't know how many of you are aware that most of our vocabulary comes in from wine. We talk about perfume, we talk about bouquet, and I can even use that word for Robusta. We do have some bouquets in the Robusta bean. Now, I just want to touch a few points here regarding processing. I think today we have washed Robustas, but I think we're embarked on a new journey, which is natural Robustas. We're embarked on a journey of changing our fermentation. We're going into anaerobic fermentation. We're going into biofermentation, double fermentation. We're going into carbonic maceration. Just this morning, we had a very interesting presentation by Dr. Lucas. He said, first understand your bean. Don't go to some 30 days of anaerobic fermentation. I hear some of the farmers saying, you know, I did 30 days, great coffees. In fact, I got spoiled fruit notes in the cup. I don't know whether I'm drinking some bacteria or drinking some coffee. So be very cautious on the fermentation. Temperature fermentation, the pH, the Brix content, all these play a major role in the taste profile of the cup. If I take the fermentation correctly, anaerobic of Robustas, I have guavas, I have bananas. I've never seen Robusta bean giving me some beautiful notes of guavas and bananas. So be careful, examine your varietal, and then link it to the fermentation step. Roasting and brewing play a very important role, very, very important role for your Robusta. Just don't sit and say, oh, I'll roast this. You dark roast it, you're going to have a bitter note in the cup. So we have found that if you do a longer roasting cycle for Robusta, you have all the taste notes of the varietal coming out with clarity and, you know, being appreciated in the cup. With regard to brewing, be very careful. In fact, lower temperatures are recommended for the brewing of Robustas. Coming to the uses, I just have a couple of points. One, it provides the body and the crema to an espresso cup. You do a blend of Arabica, Robusta. The Robusta gives you the crema and the thickness, the mouthfeel to the cup. Brew a standalone Robusta, you have a great cup of coffee. Monsoon Robusta, again, it's simply delicious in the cup. Of course, you've got to learn to appreciate it. Now, it has also been used for propagation, genetics. You know, if you look at your, I don't know how many of you are aware, but Coffea arabica has Robusta genes in it. Coffea arabica comes in from a cross of Coffea eugeneoides into Coffea canephora. In fact, I still remember when I was talking to a group which talked all about Arabica, saying, you know, it's a great pure species. I had to butt in and say, no, it's got a little bit of Robusta in it. So do remember that. So coming into genetics, yes, we use the gene, the Robusta gene, to give resistance to high-quality Arabicas, playing a major role today in climate change. Coming into that of caffeine, yes, it's got twice the content. But you know, caffeine, it can be used as a cosmetic scrub, the coffee. It can be used as diet supplements, isotonic drinks, and most importantly, in the pharmaceutical industry. Your anisine that you take has the caffeine from coffee. Now, Sunil already told you about the chlorogenic acid. Well, remember chlorogenic acid, it has a very, very important role to play in our health system. It lowers your blood pressure. It helps in a positive effect on glucose regulation and thus on the development of type 2 diabetes. Last but not the least, have consumers ever rejected the Robusta bean? I don't think it has ever been rejected. So you're on a great platform. Sell your Robustas. Only thing is, handle it carefully, cultivate it carefully, process it, you know, very, very carefully, understanding the bean. So, I mean, it's like making a halwa. You don't put sugar into a halwa, what happens to it? A terrible, terrible halwa, right? So remember to handle it very carefully. And you know, it's a very misunderstood bean. It's often, you know, considered a poor cousin of Arabica. But my favorite line is that this ugly duckling will soon turn into a beautiful swan. Thank you very much. We'll now go into the actual tasting part of it. You can ask your questions at that point of time. Sunil, take the lead for the processing and taste profiles. Is that fine? I'll explain the steps that the, control and treatment. What we have done is we're presenting to you 8 coffees. The coffees marked, I think you have the paper cups on your table. A1, do all of you have? If you don't have, just raise your hand. You don't have, or you have? You don't have. Okay. Can you just serve? I'm sorry, I didn't expect so many people. We were expecting only 35, and I was so shocked because I made only for 35. And I said 54, oh my God, I'll have to probably run to the shop to buy my paper cups. Fortunately, Hamsini brought in some additional cups. Probably she anticipated it. So please write, I think we can go down perhaps, yeah? So A and A1, all of you have? No? Okay. Sorry, sir. And can you mark it on your cups, please? I'm sure you all have a pen. Just quick, 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 run. You're running out of time. Just 1 minute. Hamsini, take some cups and give it. He doesn't have. Yeah, you have A and A1? Yeah? How many don't have? Quick, raise your hand. Go quick, go across to the back. Just keep your hand up. Then they'll know that you haven't received it. Otherwise, it's very difficult. Okay, how many of you have B and B1? Or don't have B and B1? The same group? Yeah, B and B1 over here. Sunil, 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 some cups over here. Keep your hand up, otherwise you won't get your cup. Just take the paper cups, give it. Okay, C and C1. How many don't have C and C1? Keep your hand up. Oh, you don't have anything, huh? Oh, you came in late, right? Yes. You have 5. Oh, they ate up the rest. Okay, 1 second, you'll get it. Just mark it, please. Huh? I haven't marked it, so I'd appreciate if you could mark it. Keep your hand up. All of you, the others have. How many of you have A1? A. You all have. You need A1. Okay, just take the paper cup and write A1. Okay, how many of you have B? How many of you don't have B and B1? Quick. How many of you don't have C and C1? Just take 2 cups and mark it C and C1. How many of you have D, don't have D and D1? D and D1. D. D for... I finished A, I finished B, I finished C. Yeah, we'll get you. Oh, D and E. Okay, sorry, my apologies. Okay, D and E. I'm just confused. Okay. D and E. Have you got? Yes? A, A1, B, B1, C, C1, D and E. Yeah. This, please raise your hand, keep it up. You don't have a pen. Just borrow it from your neighbor. Yeah. All right. I think, go ahead. Thank you. This is A and A1, right? Just pour a little, huh? Because they're large numbers. You get B and B1 from the back. So, go and pick up the next 2, C and C1.
So does everybody have A and A1 in their cups? You guys can start tasting them. Just look for the biggest difference. What you could feel different between these 2 cups. So they're definitely milder, and they're much harder to decipher. Okay, so that gives us an indication of what the process could be. Both. In both, you will find that the flavors are not so out there. Okay, so these are actually washed coffees, but between them, which one do you feel better? Those who feel A is a better cup, put your hand up. Oh, they haven't got. So did everybody get A and A1? Oh, we still have a few. What's with you?
Expect so many to attend this, so I was only prepared for 35, so a little bit of patience and my apologies.
How did you do your So go and see C1. C1. Start pouring from there. C, only C1. Take C and C1. Okay. And go from there and pour this way.
No, let it go, let it go, let it go. No, let it go. Let the D be poured from that end.
That's what
It's running out of time.
So let him start. Let him finish.
You check the cup.
Yes,
pour.
yeah.
Go. Being poured, just make sure it's being poured into the right cup. You ask the person who's helping you whether he's pouring D or E. Check your cup and then do it, please. I need your help.
Don't get cold otherwise.
Sometimes the flavors come out.
Is it possible to have some water? I want to cleanse the palate in between cupping the oils. Okay, but we have a jug to pour into that. I don't have a glass.
So now does everybody have A and A1? Okay. So while we discuss A and A1, they will top you up on all the others. Has everybody got a chance to taste A and A1? Like I already told you, these are the washed coffees. So between A and A1, how many people thought the A was better than the A1? Okay. How many people thought A1 is better? Okay, so by popular vote, I think A1 is a better cup. So this brings me to a point a little outside this. I know why many people picked A. It's because they're familiar with it. Okay, it's something that they relate to, it's something that they remember, and so they naturally pick it. Those people who have thought a little bit about what should I pick, they may have chosen A1. Okay, and that tells us something about these processes. A is just the traditional wash. Okay, so it is very much a washed coffee that you would get in most of India. Okay, A1, we have complicated the process for you. It is out of the same beans, but we've tried to bring about some change, and we had to present just one coffee compared to this. So this is not the limit of it, but this is one of those many possibilities. Okay? So the other thing is that when somebody chooses something that they prefer, they then don't really look at what is in the other cup. Okay? And so when it comes to processing, we say that you should have a goal in mind. And if your goal is just to get those base flavors, then you don't need to do this complication. But that is driven by consumer. And if we don't educate consumers about this, then it kind of remains unsaid. And many people don't understand, or they don't really have the bandwidth to make the choice. Okay? So if you all have a little bit left, maybe you can just taste these two and just focus on what number of flavors or descriptors you can give out of these two cups. I just want to know which is more complex. You don't have to actually write down the descriptors, but in which cup can you describe more, or do you feel that more is going on in your mouth? And would that be A1? Okay, so we did the traditional siphon, and then we pulped this coffee. After that, we actually mixed salt. So they did a 30:1 salt. They just added salt crystals and dissolved them in the pulped beans, and they fermented it in closed containers for about 48 hours. The A1. Okay? Without. Okay, after this, the coffee was washed and then it was dried. Okay, so this brought about some change. And that is the change that you noticed compared to the traditionally washed coffee. And like I said, this is just one possibility. Okay, shall we go to the next B and B1? Did everybody get a chance to taste? D. Oh, did everybody get B? Even at the back. Did everybody taste B? So from B, did we have a preference? B or B1? How many liked B better? And how many liked B1 better? Okay, so still many people liked B1 better than B, but I think it's closer than A and A1. So what happened here? The coffees were slightly closer together? Okay. So in natural progression, these are the honeys. Okay, they are more difficult to process. And so sometimes what happens is they come closer together. So you have to pay even more attention when you're trying to bring out differences. Okay. Again, this was a very simple process. The only thing that we added from the traditional pulping, heaping and fermenting it a little, and then washing it, this fermentation was done in closed containers. B1. So the B1 was put, after pulping, was put in closed containers to ferment. So therefore, we restricted air. This is a 24 hours. Yes. Yes. No. Yes. Yes. So these coffees would maybe be a little sweeter than what you tasted before. Okay, so as this coffee stays in contact with its mucilage, some of these changes or molecules that are in the mucilage tend to get absorbed by the bean. Okay, Robustas are harder, and therefore you have to allow more time for them to get absorbed. The other thing is that if you keep it too long or if you don't do it well, then it tends to go off, and those off flavors also start migrating into the bean. So your ability to keep the flavors clean and allow the time to get absorbed is one of the keys to a good honey.
Always very difficult to dry the honey coffees after, either before fermenting or whatever. So how do you manage that? And does that have an impact on the flavors?
This is the other reason why usually these lots are small lots. And if you want more drastic, more vibrant, describable flavors, you have to do it smaller. Scaling up is a whole different ballgame, which we are not really going to get into. Okay? But drying helps to preserve some of these flavors. Okay? And again, it is becoming more and more important as a part of processing, because everything you do in processing, if you don't preserve it properly while drying, then you've processed it, you've achieved it, and you have let it go away. Okay? But this is individual. It's very difficult to give broad-based answers to these questions. There are some, but the more we give these answers out, everybody feels that these are the general ways to do it. And they, again, don't venture away from that, and they don't look at their own experiences. Okay, and this is what we don't want to do. For whatever it's worth, I know many people come for answers, but those answers are in how deep you go into your process. Yeah, there is.
Any parameter to check the pH?
So there are instruments that you can use. Basically, a pH meter or one of those litmus papers will give you a base idea of what the pHs are. But like I said, you can go as complicated as you want. You can go as expensive as you want. But for everything, every parameter that you think of, there is a way of measuring it. You have to figure out how important it is to you and how much it's actually causing your product to be better. Okay, so you can't measure everything all the time. You have to choose.
We set the standard. We set the standard, the parameters.
The standards?
The
Well, I think the first thing is that we learn in coffee processing, you shouldn't go below a pH of 3. If you go below a pH of 3, you start getting sour, more spoiled flavors. Okay. Can we do, oh, sorry. Yes. Okay, can we go to C and C1? Sir, C1. So, how many people preferred C? And how many preferred C1? Okay. So I found it going back to the trend of A. There are more people on the C1 side than C. Again, progressing to the next process, these are two naturals. Heavier coffee and more flavors to describe, but sometimes not all positive, and this is the complication of naturals. There's a lot more going on, and therefore there's a lot more you have to fix. It seems easy, but when you start getting deeper and deeper into it, you have to apply more and more of what you've learned. So just the C coffee, like I said, was a plain natural. So it was harvested, it was sorted, and then it was dried, I think, over a period of 20 days. Okay. The C1, we got a little innovative. So one is that we put these coffees through a basic siphon. So we took out floaters. Okay. We fermented these coffees in closed containers for 18 hours. Okay. This process will let go of some mucilage. So when you ferment it in a closed container, some mucilage will leak out. Okay? This mucilage was actually added to the next batch, and what you're tasting is the next batch. So we did exactly the same process, except we added mucilage from the previous batch to this one, and then they dried it. So it didn't have its own fermentation, it also had fermentation from another batch. Okay, so the level of complication goes up, but also the amount of things that you have to measure will go up. what else can you measure? You can.
You measure the same parameters. So pH is one, and what are the other parameters you measure?
So in this situation, we didn't actually measure anything. They focused more on time, and they focused more on just sensory perception. So they would have smelt it, they might have picked it up and tasted it, and that was it. Okay, in all these processes, we haven't yet reached the levels of scientific instruments, though you can. Okay, but for these samples, we wanted to keep it more ordinary. We wanted to choose samples that, people could go home and maybe try small lots of these without too much complication. Okay, but even though you may not be able to put your fingers on the words, C1 should have more complexity, and it should, of what I tasted them, you should relate to some wine notes. Okay, a little bit more than the other coffees. Okay, so let's do the last two.
Excuse me, Sunil, I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
How do we get mucilage in a natural process? How do we get it out?
You don't get it out. So what happens is when you ferment the fruit, or when you hold the fruit for fermentation, it will naturally leak out. That's right. Okay, and so that is what you collect. Again, it's a very good indication. When it starts oozing out, you have reached a level of degradation and a level of pH that tells you should go to the next process. Okay, but again, like I said, it's just an indication. This is based on the goal that you want to achieve. You will see how much and what you want to do. Okay.
What about just heating the berries?
So you can, and we've seen in all the open processes, people tend to prefer it less. The closed processes seem to be more controlled and therefore lead to more descriptions in the flavors, more consistency. Yeah? That's right.
And if the coffee yard is full for a day,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they can start for a day.
Well, you should.
You shouldn't, they say you shouldn't. But then when you do that, some fermentation takes place.
Of course. Of course. And this is the point. If you learn to control it, it could be good. If you don't control it and you just say, hey, what can I do? The fruit came in and I couldn't deal with it. Then you don't know whether it's good or bad. You have to wait for the end and cup it and then figure out, oh, is this good or bad? And by then that lot is already mixed with something else. Well, and this is the point, that you must, now you know that lot is different. You know it came in at the wrong time. And so it is about managing, okay, how do I keep it aside and how do I watch it? What should I smell it, look at it, see how fast it gets runny, but don't treat it as waste.
May I go? Here.
You said you add the mucilage back to the first lot, right? So then, so what do you do with the one which has just lost its mucilage?
That was obviously just dried as another lot. Okay. The other way that you could do it is when you add it, you can also add the fruit back. Even though it adds two different lots and it is not consistent, it is still unique on its own.
But aerobic fermentation also.
Yeah.
Does it leak out?
Oh yeah, of course. Of course it will. Okay, so this is standard. It's normal. Okay, so
I have a question. Just what containers are used? Is it plastic, glass,
so
stainless steel?
these were plastic barrels.
Okay,
They
food
were
grade.
food grade plastic barrels.
Between A, B, and C, was there a difference in the varietals? And like in general, what the varietals we're tasting?
No, so I think A were both Peridenia. These naturals are actually a mix of Peridenia and C into R. But the point is A1, B, B1, and C, C1, within their group, have the same fruit. It's the same harvest.
Thank you.
Sure. Let's quickly do D and E. So did everybody get to taste D and E? Can I ask for a preference? Who likes D?
Hello.
And who likes E? Okay. So E was an easier drink. D was a little flat. E? Okay, so I'll just quickly tell you what these two are, and maybe we have time for one or two questions because we have just 5 minutes left. It's almost 1. But D was actually a semi-carbonic maceration. Okay, we did fermentation of cherries in closed containers, but they squeezed out all the air. So we put them in flexible plastic bags, and we squeezed out all the air and tied it up. Okay, we put these bags inside those plastic barrels and we close them to make sure that we have a double layer and therefore not allow any air or much air to come in. Okay, so this was pretty much completely in the absence of oxygen, given that we just use basic materials that are available, nothing fancy. Okay, this was actually kept for almost 8 days. And then they took it out and they dried it for another 20 days. Okay, so very painful, long process. But it created complexities. It is a natural. Okay, so we did it fully in the fruit. The other one, E, is interesting because it was an anaerobic fermentation, but it was with the addition of yeast. So yeast was added, and these fruits were, again, in an anaerobic condition, fermented. Okay, so yeast does something to that. Also, we naturally recognize these yeast fermentations because they happen in many other products that we use. Well, basically bread or any of the South Indian breakfast preparations have a level of fermentation in them. And so we tend to identify these flavors even if we can't really describe them. But these two coffees were definitely more complex than the other coffees. They were not just about how strong or weak it is or how bitter or sweet it is. But behind, even when it's completely cold, there are some complications, and it kind of makes you think a little bit.
I have a question. For the sample E, where we have added yeast for fermentation,
Right.
what is the duration when we had kept for the fermentation?
So this was 48 hours. Okay, but like I said, that's not a standard in any way.
So
Yes,
I have
just
a
bread
question.
yeast.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Amir.
Yeah.
When you say 20-day drying process, isn't that longer than the usual?
Well, and this is the point. If you actually look at the coffee board recommendation, for a natural, they say you should dry it at least 14 days. So yes, 20 days is a third longer, no doubt about it. But this is what I've kind of focused on in the beginning, and this is what we've said, is that you have to look at what goal you want to achieve, and then you have to see how you're going to reach there.
Wouldn't that take off the moisture a lot more?
No. So if you just dry and dry and dry, you will take off moisture and it will get over dried. But if you learn to control that drying and you say, I have X amount of moisture, do I take it out in 1 day or do I take it out in 14 days or do I take it out in 20 days? So this is the meaning of control. It's not about that I'm going to dry it at the same rate and therefore I'll over dry it in 20 days.
One question.
Yeah.
For sample E, you have told that it's anaerobic fermentation
Yes.
and for 48 days with yeast.
48 hours.
48 hours for, with yeast.
Yeah.
Now my question is, what will be the impact on the alcoholic content of it?
So what would happen is this yeast would generate some alcohol, no doubt about it. Okay? But after a point, it's a natural yeast. It's going to die because you've closed it and kept it. Okay? So at that time, it probably would have stopped. Okay? We have not really measured any of these parameters specifically, like I said, because one is people try these things, and we wanted to showcase the most base processes that we do. Okay, so whatever alcohol was created is definitely evaporated by now. This is a natural. Okay, a lot of those things would disappear when you hulled the coffee. And then finally, when you roasted it, they would have broken down anyway. Okay, as soon as you expose it to air, again, it will oxidize and become vinegar. So in that 21 days of drying, I'm sure all the alcohol disappeared.
Just going back to the slides, you mentioned in fruit fermentation.
Right.
Can you just elaborate on that a bit?
Well, so you can do an open or a closed fermentation. If you do it in the fruit, so without peeling the skin off, you then hold the mucilage close to the bean, and there is some fermentation that happens. That is called in-fruit fermentation. If you were to peel off the skin and do the same fermentation, then those molecules would migrate further than just that bean. And so you would create a different type of fermentation. Okay?
Yeah, you have one question to Hamsini Madam. Yeah, here. Among the coffees which I tasted, the one which is done in a natural process, regularly what we do in our estate, as a grower point of view I'm telling, I rated it best. And after doing all this exercise of adding yeast and anaerobic fermentation, all that grower perspective, what profit margin we get, and do we have a very good market for that? Marketing is a big challenge. Can you just throw some light on it?
So processing or what we do would depend on what our buyer wants. We customize all our processing to what the demand is for. Be it washed, be it honey, be it naturals, whole crop cherry, whatever is it that we're doing, it will depend on what the demand is for. So then that is where your margins depend on.
So I hope you enjoyed this session. I mean, it's been a short time, but what we've been trying to impress upon you is, first of all, understand the market. Start with the market. What does the market want? Does it want some exotic, complex flavors, or does it want just simple flavors because they need it for their use? It could be either as a blend or it could be as a standalone. So first of all, in the case of Robusta especially, understand the market. Understand the buyer. Ask him what he wants. And remember, consistency and homogeneity are two very important requirements. Today I may have guavas and bananas in my coffee, and next year when he wants the guavas and bananas, you're probably giving him peaches and plums. So do remember, you have to understand your process, write it down, check your temperatures, check your pH, check your bricks meters. Everything is available in the market, all these instruments. They're not very expensive. It's just that we've been doing the very traditional method of harvesting. Then we're doing wash, just pulp it, and then ferment it, or just go straight to the demucilator and then dry it. And then stack it in some jute bags which have been used for some other purpose. And then we say we have some exotic coffees in our backyard. So do remember that you've got to be extremely careful. Well, anaerobic fermentation has taken the center stage. But
when all of them
there are different ways of anaerobic fermentation. You can either do it underwater or you can do it in a closed drum. So you have to understand, especially when you use yeast, what we often suggested, do the anaerobic underwater. When you do it underwater, there is homogeneity in your coffee. So in fact, the D, I just want to tell you that we have the farmer here. She grows her coffee, be wild. no fertilizers added. You see the forest there? In fact, there is a booth there. I'd like you to go to the expo and take a look at that booth. In fact, I saw a leopard and I saw other animals, photos. And the staff was saying, they're not taken from Google. So I do believe that. So it's very, very important regarding preserving your natural fauna and flora, the animals. They all contribute to the taste profile of your cup. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much. The response has been so good. I didn't expect it at all. In fact, I roasted it in my lab. I just took some small quantities. Everybody didn't have coffees now because the season is over a long time back. But Sunil helped, Hamsini helped. We got some coffees, and thanks again to you. We had the coffees, so we roasted it. Remember, roasting for Robusta is very important. You can have some absolutely super flavors in your bean, but you can mar it with terrible roasting. Regarding slow drying, I just want to tell you, just to add one more point, don't dry it under direct sunlight. You have your shade net. You have 400, 300, 200, it depends on the type. I would suggest a 400. You go to the market, you tell them, I want a 400 grain filtered shade. Don't put a black. Black absorbs heat, and then you're going to have an over-dried coffee. Don't have black. It's only green. You have your shade net. It's not expensive. Just put it like a little pandal over your drying yard, and hey presto, your drying will be very slow. But then again, don't just allow it to lie on the ground. Today we recommend raised tables. You can't afford it, okay, use your barbecues, clean barbecues, but make sure that you keep raking it. Don't use your hard gourmandise and do some masala grinding, which I often see on the farms, breaking all the parchment covers and exposing the beans to the UV light. You're going to have a lot of black bean formation. So be very careful when you store it. Store it in clean bags. Today we have food-grade bags available in the market, a little bit more expensive, but it enables you to retain the flavors till the very end, because you're not going to sell everything in a hurry. I know all of us space it out. I received some samples just a few days back. It has been kept for how many months? It has been kept for 9 months, and I had a nice bleached bean in my cup. So be very careful. Thank you very much for participating in this workshop. I'd like to thank Hamsini, I'd like to thank Sunil, and I'd like to thank each one of you. And I'm sure you'll go back jumping like a bunny rabbit after drinking so much of Robustas. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sunalini Menon. We have almost come to the end of the session. May I call upon all the esteemed panelists to be on the stage, please? So we have, I think, we had a wonderful session and a great takeaway for all of us. So we will have a small mementos to be given away to the esteemed guests and panelists today. So may I call upon Komal to hand over. So I hope you all had a great session. So Mrs. Sunalini Menon, founder Coffee Lab India, Mrs. Hamsini Appadurai, Director Marketing, Sangameshwar Coffee Estates Limited, and Mr. Sunil Pinto, Assistant Instructor for CQIs. We may have the mementos, please, to be given away. Thank you. Hamsini Appadurai. Thank you, Mr. Sunil Pinto. Yeah, thank you, Komal. So, so we have come to the end of the wonderful session. I hope we all have a great day ahead. And thank you very much for all the participants. You have been a wonderful audience. And thank you to all the esteemed guests.